Hello, welcome to the Sci-Fi Christian. I'm Ben DeBono, here with our very first Sci-Fi Christian Trivia Challenge review. Now, what does that mean? Well, recently on the Sci-Fi Christian, we started on the podcast, we started a new feature trivia challenge that I came up with where I asked 5 questions on a particular topic. In this case, it was Lord of the Rings, specifically pipe smoking in Lord of the Rings, as long-time viewers will know, or at least Game of Thrones viewers will know. I have a particular interest in both of those topics. And the winner of this contest was able to choose one movie, one book, or up to 5 episodes of a TV show to have me watch and review on the Sci-Fi Christian. So this is the result of that. We've had our first winner for this contest, and he has selected 5 episodes from the TV series Deep Space Nine that I am going to be reviewing for you. Now, before I get into all that, let me first say that if you're interested in checking out our next trivia challenge, it is underway right now. You can go to the sci-fi-christian.com, listen to episode 154, and the details on the next trivia challenge are available at the beginning of that episode. So listen into that episode of the podcast for the questions. If you have a movie, book, or TV show that you want me to check out and review on the show, you can do so by winning the contest. So our first winner was Robin from the UK, and like I said, Robin chose 5 episodes for me to watch from Star Trek Deep Space Nine. Now, listeners of the podcast will know that I am not a big Star Trek fan. In fact, that's probably a gross understatement. I really don't care for Star Trek. I have tried to get into it several times. I've watched episodes from the original series. I've tried to watch Next Generation. I've watched a couple of the movies. The only thing that I really liked before the J.J. Abrams movie was Wrath of Khan. I thought that was, a very solid movie. But the original series I found extremely dull. I couldn't make it through more than 1 episode of Next Generation because everything was just so painfully poorly done in terms of acting and writing and all that. And I consider watching the Star Trek The Motion Picture, the first movie, to be one of the most painful and boring cinematic experiences that I've ever undergone as a sci-fi fan. It was just wretched. So, the deck is stacked against Deep Space Nine, but as part of the contest, I promised to go into this open-minded and optimistic. So I went into Deep Space Nine trying to really, really like it. And we'll see how that goes. The way I'm going to do these videos is I'm going to record a video after each of the 5 episodes that Robin selected for me to watch. So at this point, I've watched the first episode he selected, which was actually the show's pilot, Emissaries, I believe it was called. And so I haven't watched the other 4, so I'm going to edit all these together so you'll be able to see all 5 reviews, but this video will kind of serve as a diary journal, if you will, of my viewing experience of Star Trek Deep Space Nine as I try and give Star Trek one more chance to show me what I'm missing out on. So, without further ado, let's get to Deep Space Nine, Episode 1, Emissaries. Which is actually a 2-part episode. Robin pulled a fast one on me, and he got 2 for the price of 1 on this. So I'll have to be more careful about that next time with the trivia challenge. But Robin, you get away with it for this time. Emissaries started out promising for me, and it ended promising for me. And then there was a whole bunch in the middle that absolutely put me to sleep. I thought that the production values during the opening scene, the acting, all that, were actually pretty good. You know, the attack, I forget exactly what's happening, but I know Sisko's wife dies in the opening scene, and it's kind of set long before the rest of the episode. And that's all pretty well done. And so it kind of grabs your attention. It's like, okay, this isn't just the dull, we're going to put you to sleep Star Trek that I've experienced in things like the motion picture. This was actually, intriguing. So it's like, all right, here we go. And then you get into the main episode, and absolutely nothing worthwhile happens for the longest time. And I should explain, I'm not a guy who needs nonstop action. In fact, nonstop action bores me to tears. I love big ideas, which would seem to suggest I'd be a Star Trek fan. I love, deep characters and all that. But the problem is that Star Trek's ideas are so often surrounded by atrocious acting and atrocious writing. And for most of this episode, that's the case. And not only is that the case, but there aren't that great of ideas for most of the episode. It's just boring characters with cringe-worthy acting throughout. I mean, the acting in this episode is absolutely dreadful. From the lead, the guy who plays Sisko, right down to all the minor characters. I couldn't believe how poorly acted this episode was. It was just awful to watch. But during the last, 30, 40 minutes, so this, definitely the second part of the episode, since it's a two-parter, 45-minute episodes, it starts to redeem itself a little bit. When Sisko gets trapped in the wormhole and he's contemplating what it means to be human, and he's talking to the alien life forms that he finds there, and they have this philosophical discussion, that actually grabbed my attention a lot, and I really enjoyed that section of the episode. It was still poorly acted, and the writing wasn't great, but there were very intriguing ideas taking place there, and enough for me to say, okay, that was at least, worth my time to watch that. So because of that, I would rank this first episode as better than most of the Star Trek that I've seen. It didn't need to be an hour and a half long. I think if this had been a 40, 50-minute episode and they'd focused on that stuff more, I probably would have actually enjoyed it quite a bit in spite of the bad acting. But for this first one, I'm going to give it 3 stars out of 5, and that's fairly generous. I think that for most of the episode, up until we got to that cool philosophical part at the end, this was going to be, a star and a half, 2 stars, something like that. So 3 out of 5 for Emissaries. The one thing I do want to point out that I think is very worthy of mention and applause is that this series, I believe, debuts in 1993, and it has an African-American actor as its lead, which is just extraordinary, and so I think the show deserves serious props for being ahead of its time there, for where so many studios, even today, 20 years later, are, for idiotic and, dare I say, racist reasons, are very nervous about having African-American leads in TV shows and movies. Star Trek Deep Space Nine was willing to just forge ahead with that risk. And I don't know the whole behind-the-scenes story there, but that was impressive to me, and I think that, given that this is still an issue in Hollywood today, deserves mention, and makes me want to like the series a bit more for its willingness to do that. Now, at this point, if I was watching this just on my own, I probably would not go on, because even though I liked that stuff, the rest of the series, the philosophical stuff at the end, the rest of the episode was just so cringeworthy bad in terms of the acting, and really dull, that I don't think it would be enough to pull me in. But I've got 4 more episodes to watch, and this one at least gave me hope that the next 4 are going to be okay, and that maybe Robin has made a good choice here, and that by the end of this first Trivia Challenge review, I will be, if not a Star Trek fan, at least slightly more understanding of what people enjoy about it. But for now, episode 1, Emissaries, 3 stars out of 5, liked it okay, had a lot of problems with it, certainly didn't love it, and we will flash forward to the next episode right now. Alright, I'm back with the second episode that Robin had me take a look at of Deep Space Nine, the Season 4 premiere, Way of the Warrior. Another 2-parter, so Apparently I did not do a good job of checking these within the contest parameters. So Robin, you've now got me watching 7 episodes instead of 5. So congratulations on that point. I like this episode quite a bit better than the first one. I have to say that not all my issues were resolved, but they were improved in the sense that the acting is better this time around. Considerably so. I felt like the guy who plays Cisco was a lot better in this episode than he was in the premiere. The one exception to this would be the 2 female leads, and I don't know the actresses or the characters' names, but they are absolutely dreadful actors. Painful to watch, and that was the case in the pilot, and it's the case now, especially since they get the more awkward portion of this episode where they're visiting some virtual reality masseuse or something like that. I didn't quite catch everything that was going on there, and I didn't quite frankly care. It was a boring plot point with bad acting, but thankfully it was a fairly minor part of the episode. The pacing was also a lot better in this. Still a little bit slow, but that was okay. I felt like in this case it fit all right. I'll be interested to see what I think about the pacing on the show when I do finally watch a non-two-parter, because both these two-parters have been a little bit drawn out, but this one's certainly less grievous than before. What I liked about this episode was I really enjoyed the conflict building with people who had been in alliance with each other, and then those alliances falling apart between the Federation and the Klingons. I thought that was an interesting concept. And then also especially Worf with his, where he's initially loyal to the Klingons and has to choose between them and the Federation, and all of that was very interesting to me. I will say that there were a few things in this episode that I didn't quite get, because I'm not a Star Trek fan, so I didn't quite understand all the characters and all the different species and races and how all that plays out, but I was able to follow that mostly. So enjoyed this one quite a bit more. I would give it 3.5 stars. Probably it would be a 4 if I'd understood some of that stuff more, but 3.5 stars. Certainly enjoyed it. Probably not enough to make me want to watch the series as a whole, but we'll see how things go with the 3rd episode. So I will be back to you later with a review of that one. Alright, onwards to the 3rd episode of this review, in a slightly different setting today because it's a beautiful day here in Minnesota, and after a very cold spring it's nice to be able to be outside in the garage for a little bit. So this episode that I'm reviewing, the 3rd one that Robin had me watch for his contest prize, is The Visitor from Season 4. This is actually the episode immediately following Way of the Warrior, the one that I just reviewed in my time a couple days ago and in your time a few seconds ago. And this was a pretty good episode. I liked a lot of it. It, would be kind of, I suppose, an atypical Trek episode in the sense that you're not having deep space exploration or battles or anything like that, but it's more of a human story, kind of the relationship between Jake and Cisco over a period of time, as it takes place in, I guess, an alternate timeline where Cisco gets trapped in a wormhole and then he stays in the present while Jake continues to age, and father and son meet up at various points during Jake's future until Cisco's eventually sent back and the normal timeline for the series resumes. But I felt like the episode did a good job in terms of being able to hit on a more human story. I think it showed some of the emotional intelligence that I've often seen lacking in what I've seen of Star Trek, and that doesn't appeal to me as much. So a lot to like in this episode. In the first one, the premiere, or the pilot that I watched, Emissaries or whatever it was called, the first one I reviewed on this video, I felt like the relationship between Jake and Cisco was really artificial and really strained. Now granted, it's the first episode, and since I'm not watching the whole series, just bits and pieces here and there, it's kind of nice to see that they've actually made quite a bit of progress in making that a believable relationship, and one that you as a watcher feel invested in. So lots to praise in this episode. A couple of complaints. Oh, one other thing that I would note as in the plus side on this episode is I mentioned in the first two to varying degrees I had complaints about the pacing. So finally I have a 45-minute episode to watch, and I felt like the pacing was much, much better this time around. So as I was kind of suspecting, I think maybe, at least in this series from what I've seen, the two-parters are not the best format for Deep Space Nine. It feels like, we get the single episodes, and that's a little bit stronger. So a couple of complaints. The biggest complaint I had in this episode was with the framing story, where we see old Cisco kind of old Jake relating all of these encounters he's had with his dad over the years as his dad was trapped in this interdimensional thing, whatever it was. And he's relating these stories to a young wannabe writer / fan of his who shows up at his door and, wants to talk to him and get his autograph or whatever. And her character is atrocious. She's very cheesy. She's not believable. Everything about that character is unlikable, and you just roll your eyes and it's just, come on, how cheesy is this possibly going to get? I mean, literally any type of thing for the framing story would have been better. Like just having Jake sitting there, maybe he is writing this as his last story or last piece of writing before his death. I mean, that would have been interesting, and it would have furthered the emotional investment in his character, but instead we get this really cheesy character, and I don't even remember her name. She's instantly forgettable and just cringeworthy every time she opens her mouth. Partly because of the writing, and then partly, again, I'm starting to sound like a broken record on these reviews, because of the acting. She's a terrible actor. I don't know what it is with this show. There's a few decent actors in what I've seen, but so much of the acting is just stilted and lifeless, and it really takes you out of the episode. And that's really problematic in something like this that counts on you being emotionally invested in what's going on in the story. And it's not so problematic that the episode fails. It's a good episode. I enjoyed it. But the acting just is not up to par on this series. And I wouldn't be surprised if I'm saying the exact same thing for the next two reviews at the end of this video. It's just a huge problem, especially when you have a character like this that is so poorly drawn. It just compounds it and severely takes you out of the episode. So some stilted writing, some bad characterization knocked this episode down. I would give it a 3.5 out of 5, which is the same rating that I believe I gave Way of the Warrior. It's been a couple days, I don't remember. You remember better than I do since you just watched it. But this would definitely be a better episode than that one, in my opinion. Both good episodes. I'd give this one the slight nod. So I usually like to only do half stars, but maybe 3.75 or something like that. The acting and some of the poor writing at places brings it down, but overall, good story. I suspect that if you've watched the whole series, you're really going to be invested in this episode because you know more of the characters than I do just watching a few episodes. So if you're a Deep Space Nine fan, this is probably going to be one that you really, really enjoy. For me, I enjoyed it, even in spite of its problems. So I will be back with you in a moment after I finish the next episode. Alright, I'm back to talk about the 4th and 5th episodes that Robin selected for me. Yes, that's right, I got a little bit lazy and did not record a separate video for the 4th one. No excuse or reason, really. I just, like I said, got lazy, and that's what happens. But I'm going to talk about both videos here. I think I mentioned the last episode that outside, because it was nice weather, and I'm outside again today, but I'm wearing a jacket despite it being June 6th here in Minnesota, because it is freezing. And while I'm out here, I'm enjoying some Villager 1888, their early day blend, which is probably my favorite pipe tobacco right now. It is absolutely delicious. So we're talking about the ascent from, I think, season 5, but I might be wrong. It could be season 4. And in the pale moonlight, or by the pale moonlight, I forget the exact title, from season 6. So starting with the ascent, this was a pretty good episode. It's a little bit funnier. You kind of get the I don't know what you call it, the odd couple type team up in a couple of these cases where we see Jake and I think it's Nog as roommates, and they don't actually like each other as much as they would have thought that they did. And then you see Quark and other guy whose name I forget. I think it's like Oot or something like that, but I'm probably wrong. So you Star Trek fans can make fun of me. By all means, go ahead. But they're on their way. I think Oot, that's just what I'm going to call him. So if it's wrong, it's going to be wrong for the rest of this review. Oot is convicted Quark of something, and he is bringing him to trial, and their plane crashes, and they have to go up this mountain to have the video or antenna relay so they can get rescued or something like that. And it's a pretty good episode. Everything in it's fairly predictable. You know exactly where all the character beats are going from the second the episode starts until the second that it ends. It was amusing to see that Quark and Oot are still rivals. Maybe it's Odo. Could be Odo. Maybe I'll switch to Odo, because I think that might be right. Odo, Oot, whatever his name is, that they still are rivals at the end. They still don't like each other, even though we know they kind of do. So that's kind of amusing. But and that part of the story is far more successful in my mind than the Jake and Nog story. I mean, it's just, when I watch science fiction or read science fiction, I don't particularly care to spend time on the subject of some teenager who doesn't like to clean his room. I mean, that's simply not compelling to me. But, overall, the actor who plays Jake has certainly improved some by this point in the series, it would seem. I mean, he was just dreadful in that first episode that I watched, the pilot. So it's nice to see that, they've made a little progress or whatever. So I would rate this episode, again, 3.5 stars. I think that's what I've rated, like the last two or something. Right around there. It's good. It's watchable. I certainly don't dread putting it on or anything, but it still is like, it's just not where it needs to be in my mind to be really compelling television. And that brings us to By the Pale Moonlight in episode 6. I'm going to relight here for just a second. So you get to enjoy that rather dull piece of the video for you, but enjoyable for me. So By the Pale Moonlight, in which it takes place kind of Sisko retelling his actions over the couple weeks of getting the Romulans involved in this war against the Dominion by use of some fairly subversive techniques. This is the episode that I'd been wanting to see for the previous 4. Okay, this is the one that finally is like, okay, this is a great show. Or at least this episode is great. This is where everything clicks for me, and it finally sees, okay, this is the show living up to its potential. This is a phenomenal episode in terms of the way it drives you into the characters and into the moral dilemma that Sisko's facing, and finally, his final choice where he says, I do it all again. What a powerful character statements. I love this episode. It's still a little predictable in places. The dialogue and writing are still a little bit stilted, so I can't say that it's perfect, but I'd easily rate this one 4.5 stars. I thought it was extremely well done. One of the best things I've seen in the Star Trek universe in any of the stuff that I've watched. And really, it's one of those ones where I think all these episodes, except for the first one, the only episode that I haven't liked of the ones I've watched would probably be Epiphanies. I didn't care for that one at all. But the other ones, this potential was there below the surface, and it just wasn't being developed. And that was very frustrating for me. And finally, in this one, we finally get that potential coming to the forefront. So what have these, and it's by far my favorite one out of the 5 that I've watched. I think that's probably pretty clear based on my reaction to it as you're watching all 5 of these reviews back to back to back to back to back. So coming to the end of these 5 episodes that Robin made me watch, starting out as somebody who didn't care for Trek pretty much at all, has this changed my opinion? Yes and no. would be the answer to that question. No, in the sense that I see a lot of problems that I have a tough time getting past with Trek, especially the acting. In some places, just dreadful. I mean, I'm not talking universally. There's some good actors here, but just dreadful in places. Even with the lead, the guy who plays Sisko, he's okay, but he's not the best. And that is tough to get past for me because it really takes you out of the show. I don't mind dated production values. I mean, I think even you could say that for a 90s show, these look all right. They look pretty good. So yes, it looks dated in some ways, but I'm not going to hold that against the show. It's a product of its time. But the acting is just really painful in places. But even more than that, I think the number one thing that makes it difficult for me to get into Trek is that the writing is so stilted in places. The dialogue is so stilted in places. And it's really jarring because you can have, kind of good dialogue, good writing right next to dreadful dialogue and writing. And the place where you see this the most in the 5 episodes I watched was in The Visitor, where we have a compelling story, we have good character stuff going on, and then we have this B story of this would-be writer who's interviewing old Jake. And it's just dreadful. The writing there is awful. And compare that to the rest of the episode that's pretty good, pretty quality writing. I don't get why we get this cheesy, lifeless, stilted writing mixed in with stuff that's pretty good. And for me, that really takes me out of the world. It takes me out of the experience. And it stops it from being absorbing in the way that it needs to be. And I found that across the board with Trek, that whether it's cheesy dialogue or bad characters or bad acting or just poorly executed and poorly written moments, there's these points that just take me out of the world. And it seems to be a problem across the board with Star Trek, at least up until you get to the J.J. Abrams stuff, which, certainly has its own set of problems, but of a different kind, I would argue. On the other hand, I liked a lot of what I saw. Even the episodes I didn't love, I liked. I enjoyed them. Like I said, the only one I didn't care for at all was Epiphanies. I just felt like that was dreadfully dull. And I can give it a bit of a pass because it's the first episode and they're still figuring out, how this is all going to work. But I didn't care for that one at all. And then, on the other extreme, this last one, In the Pale Moonlight, or By the Pale Moonlight, or whatever it's called, I absolutely loved. I thought it was great. And then you have a bunch in the middle. The other 3 are like right in the middle of those 2, where some of the same problems from Epiphanies are cropping up in pretty dreadful ways, but yet they show the potential that's finally met in the Pale Moonlight. And it's just, to me, what holds me back from wanting to say, yeah, I'm on board, I want to go watch the whole show, is that I'm not sure how many of those middle ground episodes I actually want to sit through. I'm confident that there's other great episodes out there besides this last one that I would love and would really enjoy. I'm confident of it. And I'm confident that there's some losers too, but they're not the ones I'm worried about because every show has its missteps. It's the murky middle ground, which at least in the 5 episode sample I've watched seems to be what dominates Trek. Is that too much for me to overcome? Not necessarily, but it makes me not want to just rush out and watch more. So in conclusion, I didn't hate Deep Space Nine. I didn't hate these episodes. I liked them. I loved the last one. But there's these lingering problems that just prevent me from really embracing Star Trek in the way that I would genuinely like to. I would love to be a Trekkie. I would love to, just dive into this world and become a fan. But there's those things that hold me back. So does that mean I'm never going to revisit it? No. What I saw in these 5 have certainly given me enough hope to say, okay, maybe I would be up for watching some of the series. But are they high on my priority list? No. And the reason is those middle ground episodes that are good but also very problematic and don't ever really manage to get to greatness. So that, from these 5 episodes, is my take on Deep Space Nine. Maybe I'm not seeing enough. You can certainly tell me that in the comments, but what I would say is that these 5 episodes were selected for me by a hardcore Deep Space Nine fan in Robin. So I got to think he's trying to select some of the best of the best. And if this is the best of the best, I have to say it's not a terrible show, but I don't really feel the burning desire to jump in and watch more right now. So, Robin, thank you for an enjoyable experience that certainly gave me things to think about when it comes to Trek. I enjoyed the episodes. I'm sorry I can't be a bit more overall enthusiastic, but I certainly hope that you're hearing objectivity in the sense of me trying to set aside some of my past Trek bias, and also some genuine enjoyment of these, especially that last one, which was just fantastic. But for now, I'm Ben DeBono, and this is the Sci-Fi Christian, and that's all for now. Goodbye.